My name is Lauren Whitaker, and I never thought I'd be telling this story. But sometimes life forces you to confront truths you've been avoiding for years, and mine came crashing down at the worst possible moment: my father's funeral. It was a humid Tuesday morning in Charleston when I got the call. Grace was eating her cereal at our small kitchen table, her dark hair still messy from sleep, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Charleston Memorial Hospital, and my heart immediately sank. Dad had been battling heart problems for months, but we all hoped he'd pull through like he always did. Henry Whitaker was the kind of man who seemed invincible. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that could fix anything, and a laugh that filled every room he entered. "Mrs. Whitaker." The voice on the other end was gentle but professional. "I'm calling about your father, Henry Whitaker. I'm sorry to inform you that he passed away peacefully in his sleep early this morning." The words hit me like a physical blow. I remember sliding down the kitchen wall until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, Grace's concerned brown eyes watching me from across the room. She looked so much like Dad in that moment. The same determined jawline, the same way of tilting her head when she was worried. "Mommy," she whispered, abandoning her cereal. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. How do you tell a 9-year-old that the grandfather who taught her to fish, who built her a treehouse in our backyard, who called her his little sunshine every single day, was gone? The funeral arrangements fell to my older sister Vanessa, as they always did. Vanessa Whitaker Morrison had appointed herself the family matriarch years ago, despite being only 3 years older than me. She lived in the historic district of Charleston, in a grand antebellum house that she never let anyone forget cost over $2 million. Her husband, Richard Morrison, was a successful real estate developer, and together they embodied everything I wasn't: wealthy, connected, and seemingly perfect. I, on the other hand, was a single mother working as a nurse at Charleston General. My modest duplex in the suburbs was a far cry from Vanessa's mansion, but it was home. Grace and I had built a good life there, just the two of us, especially after Dad started spending more time with us in recent years. The funeral was held at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, the same church where our parents had been married 38 years ago. I arrived with Grace, both of us dressed in simple black dresses I'd bought at Target. Grace's small hand was warm in mine as we walked up the stone steps, past the towering white columns that made the church look like something from a postcard. Inside, the sanctuary was filled with flowers, white lilies, roses, and baby's breath arranged in elaborate displays that I knew must have cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Vanessa had spared no expense, as usual. She stood near the front, receiving condolences in a designer black dress and pearl necklace that probably cost more than my car. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't have a strand out of place, and her makeup was flawless despite what should have been a day of mourning. "Lauren," she said coolly when she saw me approach. Her blue eyes, so different from my brown ones, barely glanced at Grace. "I see you made it." There was something in her tone that immediately put me on edge, but I pushed it aside. This was Dad's day. "Of course I made it, Vanessa. He was my father too." She pursed her lips slightly. "Yes, well, I've handled all the arrangements. The service will begin in 20 minutes. I trust you can keep—" She paused, looking down at Grace with barely concealed irritation, her quiet during the ceremony. Grace pressed closer to my side, and I felt a familiar surge of protective anger. Her name is Grace, and she loved Grandpa just as much as anyone here. "I'm sure," Vanessa replied dismissively, before turning back to a group of well-dressed strangers who were offering their condolences. The service was beautiful, I had to admit. The pastor spoke about Dad's generosity, his love for his family, and his dedication to his community. Person after person stood up to share memories: his old fishing buddies, his bowling league friends, neighbors who remembered how he'd always been the first to help when someone needed it. I listened to these stories, some I'd heard before, and others that were new to me, and felt both proud and heartbroken. Grace sat beside me, unusually quiet and still. Every few minutes, she'd look up at me with those big brown eyes, and I'd squeeze her hand reassuringly. She was being so brave, but I could see she was struggling to understand why everyone was talking about Grandpa like he wasn't coming back. After the service, there was a receiving line where people could pay their final respects before the casket was closed for burial. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the final goodbye. I watched as people approached the mahogany casket, some placing flowers, others simply standing quietly for a moment before moving on. When it was our turn, I took Grace's hand, and we walked slowly toward the front of the church, Dad looked peaceful, lying there in his best suit, the one he'd worn to Grace's school play just last month. His hands were folded across his chest, and someone had placed a single red rose beside him, his favorite flower from Mom's garden that he'd continued to tend even after she passed away 5 years ago. "Mommy," Grace whispered, tugging on my dress. Can I give Grandpa the drawing I made?" My heart nearly broke. Grace had spent hours the night before drawing a picture of her and Dad fishing together, complete with stick figures and a big yellow sun. She'd insisted on bringing it, saying Grandpa would want to see it. "Of course, sweetheart," I whispered back, guiding her forward. We were just a few steps away from the casket when Vanessa appeared beside us, her hand shooting out to block our path. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice carrying across the quiet sanctuary. "Where do you think you're going?" I stared at her in confusion. We're saying goodbye to Dad." "With her?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed as she looked down at Grace. "I don't think that's appropriate." "What do you mean, not appropriate?" I could feel heat rising in my cheeks. "She's his granddaughter. She's a child," Vanessa replied coldly. "And children shouldn't be involved in this kind of thing. It's not suitable for her to see him like that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grace had been closer to Dad than almost anyone. They'd spent countless afternoons together while I worked, building puzzles, reading books, working in the garden. He'd taught her to ride a bike, to tie her shoes, to make the perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And now Vanessa was saying she couldn't say goodbye. "Vanessa, she needs this," I said, trying to keep my voice low so Grace wouldn't hear the anger building in it. "She needs to understand that he's really gone. What she needs," Vanessa snapped, "is to remember him alive, not like this. I won't have her disturbing the dignity of this moment." People were starting to stare. I could feel their eyes on us, could hear the whispered conversations beginning around the sanctuary. Grace looked up at me with confused, frightened eyes, still clutching her drawing. "Please," I whispered to Vanessa, "just let her put the picture with him. That's all she wants." "Absolutely not." Vanessa's voice was final. "I've organized this entire service, and I won't have it disrupted by a child's theatrics. Take her outside, now." The humiliation was complete. In front of Dad's friends, our relatives, and half of Charleston society, my sister had just banned my daughter from saying goodbye to her grandfather. Grace's lower lip was trembling, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. I had a choice to make. I could stand up to Vanessa, cause a scene at Dad's funeral, and force the issue, or I could take Grace outside, preserve what dignity we had left, and deal with this privately later. Looking down at my daughter's face, seeing the hurt and confusion there, I made my decision. "Come on, sweetheart," I whispered, taking her hand. "Let's go outside for a minute." As we walked down the aisle toward the exit, I could feel every eye in the church following us. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few seemed to approve of Vanessa's decision. But none of that mattered as much as the weight of Grace's small hand in mine, and the knowledge that I had just failed to protect her from the cruelest kind of family rejection. Outside in the humid Charleston air, Grace finally broke down. "Why couldn't I give Grandpa my picture?" she sobbed. "I drew it special for him." I knelt down on the church steps and pulled her into my arms, not caring that we were both crying in full view of anyone who might be watching. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." But even as I held her and whispered reassurances, I was planning. Vanessa thought she could humiliate us, could treat Grace like she was somehow less worthy of being part of this family. She thought she could exercise her power and privilege to keep us in our place. She had no idea what was coming. The next few days passed in a blur of casseroles from well-meaning neighbors and phone calls from relatives offering their condolences. Grace went back to school, but I could see the sadness in her eyes every morning when I dropped her off at Magnolia Elementary. She kept asking when we could visit Grandpa's grave, when she could finally give him her drawing. I'd folded that drawing carefully and put it in my jewelry box, promising her we'd take it to the cemetery as soon as I felt ready. The truth was, I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready to face Dad's grave, especially knowing how his funeral had ended. It was Thursday afternoon when I got the call that would change everything. I was at work, checking on Mrs. Henderson in room 314, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Lauren Whitaker? The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight southern accent. "Yes, this is Lauren. My name is Robert Charleston, and I'm your father's attorney. I wonder if you might have time to come to my office this afternoon. There are some matters regarding your father's estate that need to be discussed." I felt my stomach drop. His estate. But I thought, Vanessa has been handling everything. Yes. Well, that's part of what we need to discuss. Would 3 o'clock work for you? I managed to get coverage for the rest of my shift and drove downtown to Mr. Charleston's office, which was located in a beautifully restored antebellum building on Broad Street. The waiting room was all mahogany and leather, the kind of place that reeked of old money and older secrets. Mr. Charleston was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He greeted me warmly and led me into his office, which overlooked Charleston Harbor. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his massive desk. "Can I offer you some sweet tea? Coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." I perched on the edge of the chair, my purse clutched in my lap. "Mr. Charleston, I have to be honest. I'm not sure why I'm here. My sister Vanessa has been handling all of Dad's affairs." He nodded slowly, pulling a thick manila folder from his desk drawer. "Yes, Mrs. Morrison has been quite involved. However, there are certain aspects of your father's estate that she's not aware of." "What do you mean?" Mr. Charleston opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. "Your father came to see me about 6 months ago. He wanted to make some changes to his will, changes that he specifically requested I not share with anyone until after his passing." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of changes?" "Well, to put it simply, your father left you his house." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" "The family home on Rutledge Avenue. He left it to you, Lauren, along with all of its contents and a life insurance policy worth $200,000. The room seemed to spin around me. Dad's house, the big Victorian where Vanessa and I had grown up, the house with the wraparound porch and the garden Mom had loved so much, was mine. "But that's impossible," I stammered. Vanessa said, "She's been planning to sell it. She said Dad wanted her to handle everything." Mr. Charleston's expression grew grave. "I'm afraid Mrs. Morrison has been operating under some incorrect assumptions. Your father was very specific about his wishes. He felt that you and Grace needed the stability of the family home, especially after everything you've been through. Everything I've been through. The divorce, raising Grace on your own, working such long hours at the hospital. He was very proud of you, Lauren. He said you reminded him of your mother. Strong, resilient, always putting family first." Tears sprang to my eyes. Dad had never told me any of this directly. Our relationship had been warm but simple. Shared jokes over Sunday dinners, quiet afternoons in his garden while Grace played, comfortable silences that didn't need to be filled with words. "There's more," Mr. Charleston continued gently. He also established a trust fund for Grace's education, $50,000, to be used for college or vocational training when she comes of age. I couldn't speak. This was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. It meant security for Grace, a real home, the chance to maybe work fewer hours and spend more time with my daughter. What happens now? Well, that's where things get a bit complicated. Mr. Charleston leaned back in his chair. Your sister has been living in the house since your father's death, and she's already contacted a real estate agent about listing it for sale. She can't do that, can she? If Dad left it to me? Legally, no, but she doesn't know about the new will yet. Your father's original will from 15 years ago did leave everything to be split between you and Vanessa equally. This new will supersedes that, but Mrs. Morrison is operating based on the old document. I felt a surge of something I couldn't quite name. Not quite anger, not quite satisfaction, but something close to both. So what do I need to do? We need to inform her of the change, and we need to do it officially. I can arrange for the will to be read formally, with both of you present, or I can simply call her and explain the situation. I thought about Grace crying on the church steps, about the humiliation in front of all those people, about Vanessa's cold dismissal of my daughter's grief. I think a formal reading would be appropriate. Mr. Charleston nodded. I'll arrange it for tomorrow afternoon, if that works for you. Will you be able to attend? Absolutely. As I drove home, my mind was reeling. In less than 24 hours, my entire life had shifted. I wasn't just the struggling single mother anymore, the sister who lived in the shadow of Vanessa's success. I was a homeowner, a woman with choices, someone who could provide real security for her daughter. But more than that, I finally understood how Dad really felt about me. All those years when I'd wondered if he was disappointed that I hadn't achieved what Vanessa had, if he wished I'd married someone successful instead of divorcing my ex-husband after his gambling addiction destroyed our marriage, all those doubts were put to rest. He'd seen my struggles, and instead of judging me for them, he'd respected me for how I'd handled them. When I picked up Grace from school that afternoon, she was quieter than usual. Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, pulled me aside. "Grace seems to be having a hard time since the funeral," she said gently. "She's been very withdrawn, and she asked if she could call her grandfather during lunch today. I think she's still having trouble accepting that he's gone." My heart ached for her. "We're all still adjusting. Is there anything I can do to help? Maybe just some extra patience at home. Grief affects children differently than adults. She might act out, or have trouble sleeping, or ask the same questions over and over." As if on cue, Grace appeared at my elbow, her backpack dragging on the ground behind her. "Mommy, can we go see Grandpa today?" I knelt down to her level. "Sweetie, remember what we talked about? Grandpa is in heaven now, but we can visit his grave soon, and we can take your drawing." "But Aunt Vanessa said children aren't supposed to." "Aunt Vanessa was wrong," I said firmly, probably more firmly than I should have in front of her teacher. "You have every right to say goodbye to Grandpa, and we're going to do that very soon." That evening, after Grace was in bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and really thought about what tomorrow would bring. Vanessa was going to be furious. She'd been making plans, probably already spending money in her head, certainly operating under the assumption that she was inheriting a house worth well over $500,000 in Charleston's historic district. More than that, she was going to have to face the fact that Dad had trusted me with the family legacy, not her. Despite all her success, all her connections, all her careful cultivation of the perfect life, Dad had chosen to leave the most important thing, our childhood home, to his younger daughter. I thought about calling her, giving her some warning about what was coming. It would be the kind thing to do, the mature thing. But then I remembered Grace's tear-stained face on the church steps, remembered the way Vanessa had looked at her like she was an inconvenience, something to be managed rather than loved. No, Vanessa had made her choices at that funeral. Tomorrow, she would live with the consequences. I finished my coffee and went to check on Grace one more time before bed. She was sleeping peacefully, her dark hair spread across her pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant Dad had given her for her last birthday. In sleep, she looked so much like him. The same stubborn chin, the same way of frowning slightly even in dreams. "Everything's going to be different now, baby girl," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "I promise." As I walked back to my bedroom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope for our future. And underneath that, something else. A quiet satisfaction that justice, sometimes, really does find a way. The next morning, I woke up with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that I hadn't felt since Grace was born. I dropped her off at school as usual, but instead of going straight to work, I called in and used one of my personal days. This was too important to rush. I spent the morning at home, pacing around my small duplex and trying to imagine what it would be like to live in Dad's house again. The Victorian on Rutledge Avenue was 3 times the size of my current place, with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a garden that Mom had spent 20 years perfecting. Grace would have her own room, a real room, not the converted den she was using now. She could have friends over without me worrying about space. She could grow up in the same house where I'd grown up, surrounded by the same memories and the same love. At 1:30, I put on my best dress, a navy blue one I'd bought for job interviews, and drove downtown to Mr. Charleston's office. My hands were shaking slightly as I parked, but I felt more resolved than nervous. This was about more than inheritance. This was about Dad's final gift to me and Grace, and about Vanessa finally learning that her wealth and status didn't make her the center of the universe. I arrived 15 minutes early, but Vanessa was already there, sitting in the waiting room like she owned the place. She was dressed impeccably as always, in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. When she saw me, her eyebrows rose slightly. Lauren, what are you doing here?" "Mr. Charleston asked me to come," I said simply, taking a seat across from her. She frowned. "For what?" "I told you, I'm handling all of Dad's affairs. There's nothing for you to worry about." Before I could respond, Mr. Charleston appeared in the doorway. "Ladies, thank you both for coming. Please, follow me." His office seemed smaller with Vanessa in it. She had a way of taking up space, of making her presence felt in any room. She settled into the chair next to mine with the air of someone who was accustomed to being in charge, who expected to be deferred to. "Now then," Mr. Charleston began, opening the same manila folder from yesterday, "I've asked you both here today for the formal reading of your father's last will and testament." "Is that really necessary?" Vanessa interrupted. "I mean, we all know what Dad wanted. He and I discussed it many times over the years." Mr. Charleston's expression remained neutral. "I'm afraid there have been some changes since your last conversation with your father, changes that affect both of you." Something in his tone must have alerted Vanessa, because she straightened in her chair. "What kind of changes?" "Your father came to see me 6 months ago with instructions to draft a new will. This document supersedes all previous versions." He pulled out an official-looking document with Dad's signature clearly visible at the bottom. I watched Vanessa's face as Mr. Charleston began to read. The legal language was formal and dry, but the meaning was clear enough. Dad had left Vanessa his car, his fishing equipment, and his collection of antique tools, items with sentimental value but not significant monetary worth. To me, he'd left the house, the life insurance policy, and Grace's education fund. The color drained from Vanessa's face as the attorney continued reading. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the arms of her chair, and I could see a vein pulsing in her temple. "This is impossible," she said when Mr. Charleston finished. "Dad would never. He wouldn't have done this without telling me. I'm afraid he was quite specific about keeping these changes confidential until after his death," Mr. Charleston replied gently. Vanessa turned to stare at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine shock, mixed with something that might have been fear. "You knew about this." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I found out yesterday, same as you're finding out now." "I don't believe it." She stood up abruptly, beginning to pace in the small space behind her chair. "Dad always said the house would be split between us. Always. We talked about it just last Christmas. People's wishes can change, Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Charleston said. "Your father felt very strongly about ensuring Lauren and Grace had security." "Security?" Vanessa's voice rose. "She has a job. She has her own place. I'm the one who took care of Dad in his final years. I'm the one who organized his medical care, who made sure he was eating properly, who wouldn't let his granddaughter say goodbye to him," I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Vanessa stopped pacing and turned to face me, her blue eyes flashing with anger. "That has nothing to do with this, doesn't it?" I stood up too, feeling braver than I had in years. "Dad loved Grace more than anything in the world. She was the light of his life, and you treated her like she was nothing, like she didn't deserve to be there. She's a child. Children don't understand." She understood that her grandfather was gone and she wanted to say goodbye. That's all she wanted, Vanessa, to put a drawing she'd made for him in his casket. And you humiliated her in front of everyone. Mr. Charleston cleared his throat. "Ladies, perhaps we should—" "No," Vanessa snapped, whirling to face him. "I want to contest this will. Dad wasn't in his right mind these past few months. His heart condition, the medications, he wasn't thinking clearly." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Mr. Charleston said calmly. "Your father was evaluated by his physician before signing this document. Dr. Mitchell confirmed that he was completely lucid and understood the implications of his decisions." Vanessa's composure was cracking. The perfect facade she'd maintained for so long was starting to crumble, and I could see the entitled, petulant child she'd always been underneath. "This is ridiculous. Lauren doesn't even know how to maintain a house like that. She's a nurse, for God's sake, not someone who understands historical preservation or property values. She'll run it into the ground within 5 years. That's enough," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "You don't get to decide what I'm capable of, Vanessa. You never have." She turned on me with fury in her eyes. "You think you've won something here. You think this changes anything. That house comes with responsibilities you can't even imagine. The property taxes alone will bankrupt you. The maintenance, the utilities, the constant repairs that old houses need. You'll be begging me to buy it from you within a year." "Maybe," I said, "but that'll be my choice to make, won't it?" For a moment, we stared at each other across the office, and I saw something shift in her expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else, a recognition that the dynamics between us had fundamentally changed. "Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Charleston said carefully, "there is one other matter we need to discuss. I understand you've been staying in the house since your father's death." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "I've been taking care of it," making sure everything was secure. I appreciate that, but as the new owner, Lauren will need to take possession. How long do you think you'll need to collect your belongings? The question hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She'd been living in Dad's house for the past week, probably already thinking of it as hers, probably already making plans for redecorating or selling. Now she was being told she had to pack up and leave. I need time to process this, she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Of course, Mr. Charleston said kindly. Shall we say 1 week? That should give you time to make arrangements. Vanessa nodded numbly, then gathered her purse and stood to leave. At the door, she turned back to look at me one more time. You know, Lauren, I always protected you. When you got divorced, when you were struggling financially, when people talked about your choices, I always defended you. I thought we were family. We are family, I said. But being family doesn't mean you get to treat my daughter like she doesn't matter. She left without another word, and I could hear her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway as she fled. Mr. Charleston handed me a set of keys, heavy, old-fashioned keys that felt substantial in my palm. These are yours now. The house, the property, everything in it. Your father also left a letter for you. He asked me to give it to you privately. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Lauren, it began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're finding out about the house. I know this might come as a shock, but I want you to know I thought about this decision for a long time. You've faced more challenges in the past few years than anyone should have to face, and you've handled them with grace and strength. You've raised Grace to be a kind, loving little girl despite everything you've been through. You remind me so much of your mother, not just in looks, but in character. I know Vanessa will be upset about this decision. She's always been the successful one, the one who seemed to have everything figured out. But success isn't just about money or status. It's about how you treat people, especially the people who can't do anything for you in return. Grace needs stability, and you deserve a home where you can build the life you want for both of you. The house has been in our family for 4 generations. I know you'll take care of it, and more importantly, I know you'll fill it with the same love and laughter that your mother and I tried to give you when you were growing up. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about this decision. It's mine to make, and I made it with a clear mind and a full heart. Love always, Dad. P.S. Tell Grace there's a surprise waiting for her in the attic. I think she'll like it. I was crying by the time I finished reading, but they were good tears. Dad's final gift wasn't just a house or financial security. It was validation, recognition that I was enough, exactly as I was. When I picked up Grace from school that afternoon, I had news that would change both our lives forever. Sweetheart, I said as we sat in the car outside Magnolia Elementary, how would you feel about moving into Grandpa's house? Her eyes went wide. Really? We could live there? Really? Grandpa left it to us. It's ours now. Grace threw her arms around my neck with such force that she nearly knocked me over. Can I have the room with the window seat? The one that looks out at the garden. You can have any room you want. I laughed, hugging her tight. As we drove toward Rutledge Avenue, toward our new home, I thought about Vanessa's parting words. She'd said she always protected me, always defended me, but what she'd never understood was that I didn't need her protection. I needed her respect, her acceptance, her recognition that Grace and I were just as much a part of this family as she was. Now, finally, we had that recognition. Not from Vanessa, but from the person whose opinion had always mattered most. The first thing Grace did when we walked into Dad's house, our house, was run straight up the grand staircase to claim her new bedroom. I followed more slowly, taking in details I'd forgotten from my childhood. The way the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass window on the landing, casting rainbow patterns on the polished wood floor. The family photos lining the hallway, pictures of me and Vanessa as children, of Mom and Dad on their wedding day, of Grace at various ages, always with Dad's arm around her shoulders. Vanessa had clearly been living here, but she'd been careful not to leave obvious traces. Her designer luggage was neatly stacked in the master bedroom, and the kitchen showed signs of recent use. Everything was impeccably clean and organized, which shouldn't have surprised me. Even in the midst of grief and shock, Vanessa would maintain her standards. "Mommy, come look," Grace called from upstairs. I found her in what had been my old bedroom, the one with the bay window and built-in window seat overlooking Mom's rose garden. The room was exactly as I'd left it when I moved out after college. Pale yellow walls, white furniture, and shelves still lined with books I'd read as a teenager. "This is perfect," Grace said, spinning around with her arms outstretched. "And Grandpa said there was a surprise in the attic." We climbed the narrow stairs to the attic together, Grace practically bouncing with excitement. The space was dusty and filled with decades of family memories, Christmas decorations, old furniture, boxes of photographs. But in the center of the room, covered with a white sheet, was something that made me gasp. "What is it?" Grace asked, tugging at the sheet. I helped her pull it away, revealing a beautiful dollhouse, an exact replica of our house, complete with tiny furniture and miniature family figures. Dad must have been working on it for months. Every detail was perfect, from the wraparound porch to the dormer windows to the tiny rose garden in the back. "He made this for me," Grace whispered, kneeling down to peer into the tiny rooms. "He must have been working on it since Christmas," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Look, there's even a little girl figure with dark hair, just like you." Grace carefully picked up the tiny figure and held it in her palm. "She looks like me," she said in wonder. "Grandpa made me a little me." We spent the next hour exploring the dollhouse, discovering all the intricate details Dad had included. Tiny books in the library, miniature paintings on the walls, even a small garden with roses made from colored clay. It was a labor of love that must have taken him countless hours to complete. As the afternoon grew late, I realized we needed to head back to our duplex to pack. We couldn't move in immediately. There were utilities to transfer, mail to forward, a dozen practical details to handle. But as we walked through the house one more time before leaving, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being truly home. That evening, after Grace was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table making lists: what to pack first, which utilities to call, how to give notice to my landlord. But underneath the practical concerns, I kept thinking about Dad's letter and what he'd written about success and character. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed Vanessa's number, and I hesitated before answering. Lauren. Her voice was strained, different from the controlled fury I'd heard in the lawyer's office. "Vanessa, how are you? I've been thinking about what happened today, about what Dad wrote in his letter." I was surprised she knew about the letter. "How did you—" "Mr. Charleston mentioned it. He said Dad left personal messages for both of us." She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. Mine was difficult to read. I waited, unsure what to say. "He wrote about the funeral," she continued, "about Grace and the casket. He said he was disappointed in how I handled it, that he expected better from me. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we could cross. He also said some other things, about how I've treated you over the years, about my priorities." Her voice got smaller. "Lauren, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." "What is it?" "Richard left me." The words hit me like a physical blow. Richard Morrison, Vanessa's successful real estate developer husband, the foundation of her perfect life, gone. When? 3 months ago, right after Dad's first heart attack. She let out a bitter laugh. Apparently, he'd been having an affair with his assistant for over a year. He said he was tired of being married to someone who cared more about appearances than about people. I didn't know what to say. Vanessa's marriage had always seemed so solid, so enviable from the outside. I've been living in Dad's house because I couldn't bear to stay in my place alone. The divorce papers were served 2 weeks ago. Richard wants to sell everything and split the assets. I thought inheriting Dad's house would give me somewhere to go, something that was truly mine. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuine sympathy for my sister. Underneath all her success and status, she was just as lost and scared as I'd been after my divorce. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked gently. "Because you had your own problems. Because I was supposed to be the successful one, the one who had everything figured out. Because I was embarrassed." She paused. "And because I was afraid you might say you told me so. I would never say that. Wouldn't you? After all the times I criticized your choices, your lifestyle, your decisions, after the way I treated Grace at the funeral." She was right, and we both knew it. There had been years of subtle put-downs, of Vanessa making it clear that she thought I was settling for less than I deserved. But sitting there, listening to the pain in her voice, I couldn't bring myself to throw any of that back at her. "Vanessa, I'm sorry about Richard. I'm sorry you're going through this. Don't be sorry for me. Be angry. Be vindicated. Tell me I got what I deserve for being such a terrible sister all these years." "Is that what you think? That you're a terrible sister?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I read Dad's letter 5 times tonight. He said he loved me, but he was disappointed in the person I'd become. He said I'd inherited Mom's intelligence and determination, but I'd lost her kindness somewhere along the way. She started crying then, the first time I'd heard my sister cry since we were children. He was right. Lauren, I have lost it. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I became someone I don't like very much. My heart ached for her. It's not too late to change, isn't it? I'm 46 years old, getting divorced, and I just found out my father thought I was a disappointment. My 9-year-old niece is probably afraid of me, and my sister has every right to hate me. I don't hate you, Vanessa. You should, but I don't. And as I said it, I realized it was true. Despite everything, despite the years of feeling inferior and the humiliation at the funeral, I didn't hate her. I just wanted things to be different between us. I've made such a mess of everything, she whispered. And the worst part is, I don't even know how to fix it. For the next hour, we talked in a way we hadn't since we were teenagers. She told me about the loneliness of her marriage, how Richard had grown distant over the years, how she'd thrown herself into social climbing and material success to fill the void. I told her about my own struggles after my divorce, about the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was strong enough to raise Grace alone, about how Dad's visits had been the bright spots in my week. He never told me you were struggling, Vanessa said. When I asked about you, he always said you were doing great, that you were the strongest person he knew. He said the same thing about you, that you were successful and accomplished, and that he was proud of what you'd achieved. But he left you the house, because he thought I needed it more, not because he loved me more. By the time we hung up, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness, exactly. That would take time. But understanding, maybe. Recognition that we'd both been fighting battles the other didn't know about. The next morning, I got another surprise. I was getting ready for work when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Vanessa standing on my front porch, holding 2 cups of coffee and a white bakery bag. I brought breakfast, she said when I opened the door, and an apology. We sat at my small kitchen table while Grace ate her cereal and got ready for school. Vanessa was different, quieter, more subdued than I'd ever seen her. She'd barely touched her hair, and was wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. Grace, she said carefully when my daughter was about to leave for school. I owe you an apology. Grace looked up at her with cautious curiosity. For what? For what happened at Grandpa's funeral? You had every right to say goodbye to him, and I was wrong to stop you. Vanessa's voice was steady, but I could see how much the words cost her. Grandpa loved you very much, and he would have wanted you to be able to give him your drawing. Grace studied her aunt's face for a long moment. Mommy says we're going to take it to his grave. That's a beautiful idea. And if you'd like, I'd be honored to come with you when you do. Grace nodded solemnly. Okay. But next time, you have to let kids say goodbye too, because we love people just as much as grown-ups do. You're absolutely right, Vanessa said. I promise I'll remember that. After Grace left for school, Vanessa and I talked about practical matters. She needed a week to find a new place to live, and I needed time to arrange the move. We decided she could stay in Dad's house until the weekend, and I would officially move in the following Monday. There's something else, she said, as she was getting ready to leave. I contacted the real estate agent and canceled the listing. I also want to pay for the funeral expenses. All of them. It's the least I can do. Vanessa, you don't have to? Yes, I do. Dad's final gift to you was security and a home. The least I can do is make sure his final goodbye was everything it should have been. As she walked to her car, she turned back one more time. Lauren, thank you for not hanging up on me last night. Thank you for listening. We're sisters, I said simply. That's what sisters do. That weekend, the 3 of us went to the cemetery together. Grace carefully placed her drawing on Dad's grave, weighed down with a small stone so the wind wouldn't take it away. The picture showed her and Dad fishing together, both of them smiling under a bright yellow sun. I love you, Grandpa, she whispered. Thank you for my dollhouse. As we stood there together, Grace, me, and Vanessa, I thought about Dad's letter and what he'd written about success and character. Maybe this was what he'd really wanted all along. Not just to give Grace and me a home, but to give his family a chance to find its way back to each other. Standing there in the Charleston sunshine, surrounded by the scent of magnolias and the sound of church bells in the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. complete peace. The past week had changed everything. Our living situation, our financial security, and most importantly, our understanding of what family really means. But the biggest change of all was yet to come. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of our Victorian home, watching Grace help Vanessa plant new roses in Mom's garden. It was a warm Saturday morning in late spring, and the magnolia trees were in full bloom, their creamy white flowers filling the air with sweetness. The transformation in our lives had been remarkable, but it hadn't happened overnight. Moving into Dad's house had been an adjustment for both Grace and me. The utility bills were indeed higher than what I was used to, and there were repairs that needed attention. A leaky faucet here, some loose floorboards there, but instead of the financial burden Vanessa had predicted, the house had become a source of strength. I'd been able to reduce my hours at the hospital from full-time to part-time, thanks to the life insurance money. This meant I could be home when Grace got off the school bus, could help with homework without rushing, could actually cook dinner instead of relying on takeout most nights. For the first time since my divorce, I felt like I was truly present in my daughter's life. Vanessa had found a charming apartment in the French Quarter, much smaller than her previous home, but closer to the gallery where she'd started working part-time. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, and while the financial settlement wasn't as generous as she'd hoped, she seemed lighter somehow, free from the pressure of maintaining a perfect facade. "Mommy, Aunt Vanessa says these roses will bloom all summer," Grace called out, her hands covered in soil, her face bright with excitement. "That's right, sweetheart," I called back. Just like grandmas used to. Watching them work together in the garden was something I never could have imagined a year ago. Vanessa had been making an effort, a real effort, to build a relationship with Grace. She came over for dinner every Sunday, helped with school projects, and had even attended Grace's spring recital, cheering louder than anyone when my daughter played her violin solo. The biggest surprise had come 2 months after we moved in. I was sorting through some of Dad's papers in his study when I found a sealed envelope with Vanessa's name on it, tucked away in his desk drawer. Inside was a key and a note explaining that he'd purchased a small investment property near the college, a duplex that he'd been renting to students. The rental income wasn't enormous, but it was steady, and it was hers. When I gave her the envelope, Vanessa had cried. Not the angry, frustrated tears she'd shed the night she called me, but tears of gratitude and relief. Dad hadn't forgotten her after all. He'd just saved his gift for when she needed it most. He knew, she'd said, holding the key in her palm. Somehow he knew about Richard, about the divorce. He knew I'd need something of my own. The property had given Vanessa the financial security to leave her marriage completely and start over. More than that, it had shown her that Dad's love hadn't been conditional on her success or her perfect life. He'd loved her just as much as he'd loved me. He'd just known we needed different things. Now, as I watched my sister teaching my daughter how to properly space the rose bushes, I marveled at how much had changed. Grace adored her aunt, and Vanessa seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with her niece. There was a gentleness in Vanessa now that I remembered from when we were children, before life had made her hard and competitive. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the front window, I could see a familiar figure on the porch, Dr. James Mitchell, Dad's former physician, holding a manila envelope. "Dr. Mitchell," I said, opening the door. "What a surprise. Please, come in." He was a kind man in his 70s, with gentle eyes and a warm smile. "Lauren, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I have something that belonged to your father, something I thought you should have." He handed me the envelope, which was heavier than it looked. "Your father asked me to hold on to this and give it to you after he was gone. He said to wait until you'd settled into the house." Inside the envelope was a smaller sealed letter and a worn leather journal. The letter was addressed to Lauren and Vanessa, and my hands were shaking as I opened it. "My dear daughters," it began in Dad's careful handwriting. "If Dr. Mitchell is giving you this, then you've had time to adjust to your new circumstances, and I hope you found your way back to each other. This journal belonged to your mother. She started writing in it when you girls were babies, and she continued until just before she died. She wrote about her hopes and dreams for both of you, about the kind of women she wanted you to become, about the love she felt watching you grow up. I kept it private all these years because her words were too precious to share while I was grieving. But now, I think it's time for you to read what she wrote about you, to understand how proud she was of both her daughters. Mars Lauren. She wrote about your compassion, your strength in the face of adversity, your natural ability to nurture and heal. She knew you would be an amazing mother long before Grace was even born. Vanessa, she wrote about your intelligence, your determination, your ability to achieve anything you set your mind to. She worried that the world might make you hard, but she believed that underneath it all, you would always have a good heart. She was right about both of you. You are both exactly the women she hoped you would become, even if it took you different paths to get there. Read her words together. Remember what it means to be sisters, and know that wherever your mother and I are now, we are so very proud of the family you've built. All my love, Dad. I was crying by the time I finished reading, and when I looked up, I saw that Vanessa and Grace had come inside and were standing in the doorway, their gardening gloves still on their hands. What is it? Vanessa asked, concerned. I handed her the letter and watched her face as she read it. When she finished, she was crying too. Mom's journal, she whispered. He saved it all these years. Dr. Mitchell excused himself quietly, leaving us alone with this final gift from our parents. We sat together in the living room, Vanessa, Grace, and I, and took turns reading passages from Mom's journal. The entries were beautiful and heartbreaking. Mom had written about the day Vanessa took her first steps, about how determined she was even as a toddler. She'd written about the day I was born, about how Vanessa had insisted on helping feed me and change my diapers. She'd documented our childhood adventures, our sibling squabbles, our individual personalities as they emerged. But more than anything, she'd written about her dreams for our future relationship. I hope my girls will always be friends, she'd written when I was 5, and Vanessa was 8. I hope they'll support each other through whatever life brings, that they'll celebrate each other's successes and comfort each other through failures. I hope they'll understand that being sisters is one of life's greatest gifts. She would have loved Grace so much, Vanessa said, wiping her eyes as she read an entry about Mom's hopes for future grandchildren. She would have loved seeing you two together, I added, watching Grace carefully turn the delicate pages. We spent the rest of the afternoon reading the journal, discovering stories we'd never heard, understanding our parents' hopes and fears in a way we never had before. It was like having one final conversation with Mom, one last chance to feel her love surrounding us. That evening, after Vanessa had gone home and Grace was asleep, I sat in Dad's study, my study now, and thought about the journey that had brought us here. 6 months ago, we'd been 3 separate people dealing with grief in our own ways. Vanessa had been hiding behind her perfect facade, Grace had been struggling to understand loss, and I had been trying to hold everything together while feeling like I was failing at it. Now, we were a family again, not the same as before. We could never go back to being children who took their parents' love for granted, but something new and perhaps even stronger. We were sisters who had learned to see past each other's flaws, who had discovered that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. The next morning was Sunday, which meant Vanessa would come for dinner as she had every week since we'd reconciled. Grace was excited because we were planning to start a new tradition. Sunday afternoon tea parties in the garden, complete with tiny sandwiches and Mom's good china. As I prepared the meal, I thought about Dad's final lesson. He'd known that leaving me the house would shock Vanessa, would force her to confront her own behavior and priorities. But he'd also known that underneath her perfect exterior was the same little girl who had once helped take care of her baby sister. He'd gambled that the crisis would strip away the pretenses and reveal the person she really was underneath. It had been a risky strategy, but it had worked. Sometimes people need to lose everything they think they want before they can find what they really need. When Vanessa arrived that afternoon, she brought a surprise, a small framed photograph of Mom that she'd found while cleaning out her old house. I thought it should be here, she said, placing it on the mantelpiece next to a picture of Dad and Grace fishing together. This is where she belongs. After dinner, we sat in the garden for our tea party, using Mom's delicate china cups and the tiny silver spoons she'd inherited from her grandmother. Grace, dressed in her favorite sundress, served us imaginary sandwiches and very real chocolate chip cookies. This is nice, Grace said, carefully balancing her teacup. And I think Grandpa and Grandma would like this. I think they would too, Vanessa agreed, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind Grace's ear. I think they'd be very happy to see us all together. As the sun set over Charleston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a deep sense of contentment. We'd been through so much. Grief, anger, disappointment, fear, but we'd come out the other side stronger and more connected than ever. The house around us was filled with the love of 4 generations of our family. Mom's roses bloomed in the garden, Dad's woodworking tools hung carefully organized in the garage, and Grace's laughter echoed through rooms that had heard the laughter of children for over a century. "Thank you," I whispered, looking up at the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you for everything." I wasn't sure if I was talking to Mom, to Dad, or to the universe in general, but as Grace giggled at something Vanessa was saying, and as my sister's genuine smile lit up her face, I knew that somehow, somewhere, they were watching over us, and they were proud. 3 years later, Grace is 12 now and thriving in her new school. She plays violin in the youth orchestra and has become something of an expert on Victorian architecture, giving tours of our house to anyone who will listen. The dollhouse Dad made for her sits in a place of honor in her room, and she still adds new tiny details to it regularly. Vanessa remarried last year, a kind, quiet man named David who owns a bookstore in the historic district. Their wedding was small and intimate, held in our garden under the magnolia trees. Grace was the flower girl, and I was the maid of honor. For the first time in our adult lives, Vanessa and I stood together as sisters, supporting each other through one of life's most important moments. I've started taking classes at the community college, working toward a degree in social work. The financial security Dad's gift provided has allowed me to pursue dreams I'd put aside years ago. I want to help other families navigate crisis the way we learned to do, to show them that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Every Sunday, we still have our tea parties in the garden. Sometimes it's just the 3 of us. Sometimes David joins us. And occasionally one of Grace's friends will participate in the elaborate ceremonies my daughter has developed. But no matter who's there, the tradition continues, a weekly reminder of the love that binds our family together. Last week, Grace asked me if I missed our old duplex, if I ever wished things had gone back to the way they were before Grandpa died. Never, I told her honestly. This is where we belong. This is where our story was always meant to continue. And it's true. Sometimes the most beautiful gifts come wrapped in the most painful packages. Sometimes losing what you think you want is the only way to find what you really need. And sometimes, when you think your family is broken beyond repair, love finds a way to put the pieces back together in a pattern even more beautiful than before. Dad's final gift wasn't just a house or financial security or even justice for the way we'd been treated. His final gift was the chance to become the family we were always meant to be, flawed but loving, different but united, stronger together than we ever could have been apart. Standing in the garden where 4 generations of our family have lived and loved and dreamed, I know that this story, our story, is far from over. There will be more challenges, more changes, more opportunities to choose love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, hope over despair. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together, as sisters, as family, as living proof that sometimes the best inheritance isn't money or property. It's the wisdom to recognize what really matters, and the courage to fight for it, no matter how impossible it might seem. And in the end, that's the greatest gift of all. 5 years have passed since that transformative day at the lawyer's office, and I'm sitting in the same garden where Grace and Vanessa planted those roses, watching my daughter, now 14, practice violin for her audition at the Charleston Youth Conservatory. The music drifts through the magnolia trees, mixing with the sound of wind chimes Dad hung from the porch years ago. Life has a way of coming full circle in the most unexpected ways. Last month, I received a call that would test everything our family had learned about forgiveness and second chances. Richard Morrison, Vanessa's ex-husband, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 52. His current wife had left him, his business was failing, and he had no one to help him navigate the devastating diagnosis. The call came from his lawyer, explaining that Richard had listed Vanessa as his emergency contact despite their bitter divorce. He was asking, not demanding, but asking, if she might consider helping him find appropriate care. I was with Vanessa when she got the news. We were in my kitchen, planning Grace's upcoming birthday party, when her phone rang. I watched her face change as she listened, saw the complex emotions playing across her features, anger, hurt, but also something that might have been compassion. "I don't know what to do," she said after hanging up. A part of me wants to tell him to figure it out himself, the way he left me to figure out my life after he walked away. "And the other part?" I asked gently. "The other part remembers that we were married for 15 years, that there were good times before everything fell apart, that no one deserves to face something like this alone." It was Grace who ultimately helped Vanessa make her decision. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Vanessa explained the situation to her niece in age-appropriate terms. "What would Grandpa have done?" Grace asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter with the clarity that only children possess. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. "He would have helped," she said finally, "even if it was hard, even if the person didn't deserve it." "Then you know what you have to do," Grace said simply, returning to her spaghetti as if she hadn't just delivered the wisdom of the ages. The next few months were challenging in ways we hadn't anticipated. Vanessa found Richard a memory care facility and helped him transition his business affairs to a trusted manager. She visited him regularly, not as a former wife seeking reconciliation, but as someone who understood what it meant to be alone and afraid. David was incredibly supportive throughout the process, never questioning Vanessa's decision to help her ex-husband. "This is who you are," he told her one evening when she was doubting herself. "This is why I fell in love with you, because you choose compassion, even when it's difficult." Watching Vanessa navigate this situation showed me how much she'd truly changed. The woman who had once been so concerned with appearances and social standing was now making decisions based on simple human decency. She wasn't helping Richard to look good or to prove anything to anyone. She was helping him because it was the right thing to do. But the real test of our family's strength came when Richard, in a moment of clarity, asked to see Grace. "He wants to apologize," Vanessa explained to me and Grace one Sunday afternoon. "He remembers how he treated our family during the divorce, how he made snide comments about you being a single mother, how he discouraged me from spending time with you both. He says he wants to make amends while he still can." Grace, now mature beyond her years, considered this request seriously. "Will it make Aunt Vanessa feel better if I go?" "This isn't about me, sweetheart," Vanessa said. "It's about whether you want to give him the chance to apologize." "Then I'll go," Grace decided. Grandpa always said, "Forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it. It's about not carrying anger in your heart." The visit was brief but meaningful. Richard, diminished by his illness but still lucid, looked at Grace with tears in his eyes. "You've grown into such a beautiful young lady," he said. "I'm sorry I wasn't kinder to you and your mother when you were little. I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you, and I let that anger make me cruel." Grace, with the grace that had always defined her, simply said, "It's okay, Mr. Richard. People make mistakes. The important thing is that you're sorry now." That interaction seemed to give Richard a peace he'd been searching for. His decline accelerated after that, but Vanessa continued to visit him regularly until he passed away 6 months later. At his funeral, a small, quiet affair, she sat in the front row, honoring the man he had been at his best, not the person he'd become at his worst. "I learned something important these past few months," Vanessa told me as we drove home from the service. "Forgiveness isn't a one-time decision. It's a choice you have to make over and over again, especially when it's hard." Meanwhile, Grace was blossoming into a remarkable young woman. Her violin skills had earned her a scholarship to a prestigious summer music camp, and she'd been accepted into the advanced placement program at her high school. But more than her academic and musical achievements, I was proud of the person she was becoming. Kind, thoughtful, and wise beyond her years. She'd started volunteering at the memory care facility where Richard had lived, playing violin for the residents and spending time with those who rarely had visitors. It had been her idea, inspired by her experience with Richard and her desire to bring music to people who were struggling with loneliness and confusion. "Music is like a bridge," she explained to me one evening after returning from the facility. "Even when people can't remember words or faces, they can still feel the emotions in music. It connects them to something beautiful." Watching her interact with the elderly residents, seeing how naturally she showed patience and compassion to people society often forgot, I knew that Dad would have been incredibly proud of the young woman she was becoming. This past spring brought another unexpected development. Dr. Mitchell, Dad's former physician, approached me with a proposition. He was retiring and wanted to donate his medical practice to establish a community health clinic for underserved families in Charleston. He asked if I would consider directing the clinic once I finished my social work degree. "Your father always said you had a gift for helping people," he told me. "This clinic could serve families who can't afford private health care, who need someone who understands what it's like to struggle." The opportunity was both exciting and terrifying. It would mean leaving my comfortable position at Charleston General, taking on enormous responsibility, and stepping into a leadership role I'd never imagined for myself. But it would also mean helping families in ways I'd always dreamed of. Grace was enthusiastic about the idea. You always wanted to help people, Mom. This is your chance to help lots of people. Vanessa was equally supportive. You'd be amazing at this, Lauren. You have the heart for it, and you understand what these families are going through because you've been there yourself. David, who had become like a brother to me over the years, offered to help with the business side of establishing the clinic. His bookstore had given him experience with nonprofit organizations and community partnerships. 6 months later, the Whitaker Family Health Clinic opened its doors in a renovated building downtown. The name had been David's suggestion, a way to honor Dad's memory while acknowledging that this was a family effort. Vanessa had helped with fundraising. Grace had organized a benefit concert featuring the youth orchestra, and the entire community had rallied behind the project. On opening day, I stood in the waiting room surrounded by my family and felt Dad's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside me. The clinic was everything he would have loved, a place where people were treated with dignity, regardless of their ability to pay, where families could get the help they needed without judgment or shame. Our first patient was a young single mother with a sick toddler and no insurance. As I sat with her in the examination room, listening to her fears about her child's fever and her worries about the cost of treatment, I saw myself 5 years ago, struggling, scared, but determined to do whatever it took to protect my daughter. "Don't worry about the cost," I told her gently. "We're here to help. That's what this place is for." The gratitude in her eyes reminded me why I'd chosen this path, why Dad's final gift had been about so much more than financial security. It had been about giving me the foundation I needed to build something meaningful, something that would help other families the way our family had been helped. That evening, as we celebrated the clinic's opening with dinner in our garden, I looked around the table at the family we'd become. Vanessa and David, their faces glowing with happiness and purpose. Grace, now 15 and preparing for her junior year of high school, already talking about studying music therapy in college so she could combine her love of music with her desire to help people. "I have an announcement," Grace said, raising her glass of sweet tea. "I've been thinking about what I want to do for my senior project next year." We all looked at her expectantly. "I want to write a book about Grandpa, about how he taught us that the best inheritance isn't money, it's love and wisdom, and the courage to choose kindness even when it's hard." Vanessa started crying, happy tears this time. "Oh, sweetheart, that's beautiful. I want to interview all of you about your memories of him, and I want to include excerpts from Grandma's journal. But mostly, I want to tell the story of how our family learned to forgive and love each other better." As Grace outlined her project, I felt a deep sense of completion. Dad's story, our story, would live on, not just in our memories, but in a record that future generations could read and learn from. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Grace was asleep, I sat in Dad's study reading one of Mom's journal entries I'd never shared with anyone else. It was written just a few weeks before she died, when she was already very sick, but still thinking about her daughters' futures. "I hope my girls will understand someday that the most important thing isn't having a perfect life," she'd written in her careful script. "It's having a life filled with love, even when that love comes in unexpected packages. I hope they'll learn that family isn't about being alike. It's about choosing to support each other despite your differences. And I hope they'll remember that the best way to honor those who came before them is to build something beautiful for those who come after." Sitting there in the quiet house, surrounded by the accumulated memories of 4 generations of our family, I realized that we had done exactly what Mom had hoped. We'd learned to love each other, not despite our differences, but because of them. We'd built something beautiful, not just the clinic, but a family legacy of compassion and resilience. The house itself had become more than just a home. It was a gathering place where Grace's friends came to study and practice music, where Vanessa and David hosted their book club meetings, where neighbors stopped by for advice or just a friendly conversation. It was what Dad had always intended it to be, a place where love lived and grew and spread to anyone who needed it. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I paused in the hallway to look at the wall of family photos. There were new pictures now: Vanessa and David's wedding, Grace's school concerts, the clinic's opening day, countless Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. The wall told the story of a family that had been broken and rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, hope over despair. The clinic would serve more families, Grace would continue growing into the remarkable woman she was becoming, and Vanessa would keep discovering new depths of her own capacity for kindness. But tonight, As I checked on Grace one more time before heading to my own room, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for Dad's wisdom, for Mom's enduring love, for Vanessa's courage to change, for Grace's pure heart, and for the chance to be part of a story that proved the very best thing about human nature, our ability to transform pain into purpose, loss into love, and endings into new beginnings. The last thing I saw before falling asleep was the framed copy of Dad's letter on my nightstand, the one where he'd written about success and character. In the moonlight streaming through the window, I could just make out his final words. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about this decision. It's mine to make. And I made it with a clear mind and a full heart. I'd carried those words with me through every challenge of the past 5 years, and I knew I'd carry them for the rest of my life. They were more than just a father's love for his daughter. They were a reminder that sometimes the most difficult decisions are also the most necessary ones, and that love has a way of working itself out in the end, even when we can't see how, especially then.